Cowboy saved the Apache chief's daughter from drowning, then was offered a reward he couldn't accept. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight, and when the end this story. Don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She was there 1 second and gone the next. Long black hair swallowed by a river gone wild with spring snowmelt. The kind of current that don't just take your breath, it takes your name. Silas McCrae didn't think. One heartbeat, he was in the saddle. The next, the cold hit him like a fist from God. The river fought like it had a score to settle. He went under once, twice. Fingers brushing something soft. Then skin, then nothing but the dead weight of a woman who should have been lost forever. He pulled her to shore, coughing river and mud, laying her down on cold stones. For one long breath, she didn't move. Then her chest rose, and she turned away from him, like she'd rather face the river again than his eyes. She never said thank you, and that was how it began. The river wasn't the only thing swollen that spring. The whole land seemed full of itself. Sky stretched wide, swollen with light, grass waving high as a man's waist, and the wind restless as a caged Mustang. Silas McCrae rode slow that morning, not because he was lazy, but because he had nowhere worth hurrying to. Hat brim low, horse's reins loose, the kind of ride where a man listens more to his own thoughts than the land around him. There'd been places once, towns, ranches, but each had its own reason for shutting its doors to him. He never pushed against a closed door, just moved on, always moving on. Abel, his sorrel gelding, stopped at the river to drink. That's when the scream came sharp enough to strip the skin from your back. Not a word, not a cry for help, just raw fear turned into sound. And in the middle of that raging water, a figure, arms flailing like torn cloth before vanishing. The rescue, you already know, cold, that went straight to the bone, fingers, finding her in the dark water, dragging her limp weight back to the world. And the moment her breath came back, she turned from him, clutching herself like the fire in his camp might burn her worse than the river had. By dawn, they weren't alone. Riders came silent as shadows bareback, faces painted, eyes that could cut the hide from a man. A circle closed around him, unblinking. At their head, a tall man with white in his braid and eyes that saw far past the skin. Takakota, chief of this Apache band. You pulled my daughter from death, the chief said in slow English, shaped by smoke and time. We are in your debt. Silas shifted in the saddle blanket he'd wrapped around himself. Didn't do it for debt. Takakota studied him, like a hawk studies a rabbit, not for kindness, but for truth. You will take her hand. The words hit harder than the river. Silas blinked. Sir, I didn't save her for reward, and certainly not. I'm not for trading. The voice came from behind the chief. She stepped forward, barefoot, wet dress clinging to her frame, her chin lifted like a challenge. Not for tobacco, not for thanks, not for anything. Then she walked away. No backward glance. Silas could have left then, should have. But instead, he stayed near the river, mending a fence here, lifting a post there. He told himself it was because the water ran cleaner here, but he knew better. And on the 5th day, she found him tightening his saddle cinch, arms crossed. Why are you still here? River's cleaner here, he said, without looking up. She didn't smile, then go marry it. That night, he found a folded square of cornbread on his saddle. He didn't eat it right away. Part 1. Silas McCrae knew what it felt like to wear the wrong skin in a place. It was the same, no matter where he went. A saloon where every man's shoulders seemed to stiffen at his entrance. a trail crew where conversation died when he passed. Here, in the Apache camp, it was no different, only now the silence was sharper, cleaner, like a knife edge instead of a blunt stone. The days stretched. Morning to night, the smell of wood smoke clung to him, along with the sideways glances of men who didn't care that he'd pulled their chief's daughter from the river. Some of the women looked away when he passed. Others didn't bother. One spat near his boots. Another muttered something in her own tongue. He didn't need translation. Shame and suspicion have their own sound. Still, he stayed, slept near the horses, outside the main circle of the camp. Abel grazed close, a familiar shadow in a place where nothing else felt his own. At night, he'd lie back on his blanket, eyes tracing the stars, remembering how easy it would be to ride away. The land was wide enough to disappear, but riding away this time would feel too much like running, and Silas had done enough running. The girl, Ayoka, didn't seek him out, but neither did she avoid him completely. Once, he caught her looking his way while tending to a cooking fire. She didn't turn fast enough to hide it. Other times, he saw her on the far bank of the river, washing clothes or kneeling to gather herbs. Her back would be straight, her movements sure. There was a kind of pride in her that even the river hadn't taken. The first crack in the wall came with the dog. It was a rangy thing, coat full of burrs, ribs showing under a too thin hide. He'd seen it following her before, loyal as a shadow. That day it limped into camp, a deep gash along its hind leg, fur matted with blood. Silas was crouched beside it before he even thought. He tore a strip from his own shirt, rinsed the wound with water from his canteen, and bound it snug. When she arrived, she stopped short. "What are you doing?" "Helping." "It's not your dog." "I know." Her eyes held him for a long moment, searching. She said nothing more, just stepped closer and took the dog's head in her hands. He left the binding as it was and stepped back. That night, she brought him a strip of smoked venison. She didn't hand it to him, just set it on the rock by his fire and walked away. He waited until she was gone to take a bite. The days turned slow. He mended a broken corral post for a man who refused to look him in the eye, helped a boy lift fence rails too heavy for him, drew water from the river for a woman who didn't say thank you. None of it softened the camp's mood much, but it kept his hands busy. And Silas believed in work, if only because it kept a man from thinking too hard. One evening, he was tightening his saddle cinch when he heard her behind him. "Why are you still here?" she asked. He didn't turn. "River's cleaner here." She didn't smile. "Then go marry it." That night, he found the square of cornbread on his saddle. He didn't eat it right away. Some gestures are better saved for when the world feels colder. The wound between them and within them wasn't just mistrust. It was older, deeper. Hers was carved the day the river took her brother. She'd been a girl then, and Silas suspected she still carried the sound of his voice in her chest. She didn't say it, but he could see it in the way her eyes went far away whenever the river's roar got too loud. His own wound was harder to name. It wasn't one event, but a lifetime of little abandonments. A father who left before he could remember his face. A cavalry captain who promised him a place, then sent him off without pay when the war ended. Friends who forgot his name as soon as his back was turned. Some wounds are loud. They howl for the world to hear. Others are quiet, settling in your bones until you can't tell where they end and you begin. Silas's was the quiet kind, and it seemed hers was too. It was near sundown when the first test came. A group of young men from the camp, lean, restless, and not old enough to be careful, came walking past his fire. They spoke in their own tongue, but their eyes made their meaning plain. One spat near his boots, another laughed and said something that made the others grin. Silas didn't move, didn't even look at them long. He could have stood, could have met insult with insult, but he didn't. Pride is a dangerous currency when you're already in debt. He just took another slow bite of his biscuit and looked past them toward the sky, bruising purple over the hills. That restraint was its own kind of statement, and if anyone noticed, it wasn't enough to change their minds, not yet. A week passed before the storm came. The day had been hot, sky bright enough to sting your eyes. But near sundown, the air shifted. You could smell the rain before you saw it, sharp, metallic, like the earth was bracing for something. Silas was miles from camp, leading Abel toward a patch of good grazing, when the first crack of thunder split the sky. The rain hit hard and sudden, sheets of it driven sideways by wind. He pulled Abel under a red rock ledge, struck a quick fire with what dry tinder he had. The flames licked at the wet air, small but stubborn. That's when he saw her Ayoka, soaked to the skin, hair slick as black ink, standing at the edge of the ledge. "You followed me?" he asked. She stepped inside, breath heavy. "You don't belong here," she said. He almost laughed, not out of humor, but truth. "I know, but somehow you fit," she added after a moment. He looked at her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "That's supposed to be a compliment. You listen like a tree," she said quietly. "Quiet, strong, older than you are." The fire popped between them. Outside, the rain came harder. She sat down beside him, not close enough to touch, but closer than she'd ever been. "I'm not ready to be someone's prize," she said finally. "I'm not trying to win you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that holds. That was how it began, not with a confession, not with a kiss, but with two people sitting in the rain, a small fire between them, speaking truths they hadn't told anyone else. But the wound remained, and wounds don't close overnight. Silas still woke most mornings to the sound of the camp moving without him. The women still drew their children close when he passed. The young men still watched him with the kind of eyes that said they were waiting for him to give them a reason. Only Ayoka's gaze had changed, and that was enough to keep him there. One night, he returned from gathering firewood to find Abel standing restless, ears flicking. Someone had tied a strip of smoked venison to his saddle, not left near his fire, not tossed at his feet, tied there, as if to say, "I see you." He looked toward the camp, but saw no one watching. The stars were bright overhead, cold and sharp as flint. Silas untied the meat, held it in his hand for a moment, and then sat down by his fire. He didn't eat it right away. Instead, he just sat, listening to the night, sounds the river in the distance, the wind through the willows, the soft breathing of his horse. The wound was still there, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like it was bleeding. Part 2. Suffering. The days in camp grew heavier, not with storm clouds or biting wind, but with the kind of weight that settles in people's eyes. A man can feel when he's being measured, and when those doing the measuring are hoping to find him wanting. Silas felt it in the way conversations dimmed as he passed the cooking fires, in the way laughter stilled when he drew near. Even the children, so quick to grin when he showed them how to twist a rope knot, would glance toward their mothers first, as if seeking permission before they dared smile back. He understood. He was a white man on Apache ground, and too many bad stories had already been written about men like him. Knowing why didn't make the days any shorter. One afternoon, he helped a boy mend the rawhide tie on a pony's bridle. The boy was eager, quick to learn until his uncle appeared. The man's gaze found Silas and hardened. Without a word, he took the reins, turned the boy toward camp, and walked away. That night, someone spat close enough to his boots for the leather to shine wet in the firelight. A woman, passing with a clay pot, muttered something sharp in her own tongue. He didn't need a translation. he let it pass. Not because he was patient, not because he was saintly, but because he knew how quickly a single wrong step could close every door for good. The one soul who showed him no suspicion was the dog. Its wound had healed beneath the strip of cloth he'd torn from his own shirt, and it had taken to sleeping near his fire. Sometimes he would wake to find its head resting close to his boots, eyes half open, keeping watch over the night. Ayoka noticed. She said nothing, but the look she gave her dog when she saw it, there was quieter than words, yet full as thanks. One evening, she came to him at sundown. The hills behind her brushed in the last red of the day. She carried 2 strips of smoked venison. Without a word, she offered him one, tore into the other, and sat across the fire. "I used to have a brother," she said at last, her voice low, as if the air might overhear and take offense. "He drowned in that river when we were small. My father has never forgiven the water, or himself." Silas listened without moving. "He tries to protect me now," she went on. "Too much. Offers my hand to men he thinks will keep me safe. But I don't want protection." Her eyes were steady on his. "I want someone who sees me." "I hear you," he said simply. No promises, no grand words. The day trouble came. The sky turned the color of old bruises. A scout returned with word that a neighboring tribe had taken offense at Silas's presence. White blood, they said, had no place sleeping on Apache ground, not even if it had pulled the chief's daughter from a river's grip. That evening, Chief Takakota faced him. "You have brought unease to my people," he said. "You have done no wrong, but your being here makes some see danger." Silas nodded. "I can leave." The chief's eyes narrowed, weighing him. Leaving would please them. It would not honor you. There is another way. The other way was fire, a trial older than the white man's maps, the path of coals, a long bed of burning embers, flanked by the watching eyes of the tribe. Not punishment, but proof. A man who walked that line without flinching showed his spirit could carry pain without breaking. "If you walk it," Takakota said, "you will be seen not as an outsider, but as one willing to bleed for belonging." Silas looked at the glowing coals, the air above them, rippling with heat. He thought of the river that had nearly claimed him, of the places he had left behind, of the quiet way Ayoka's eyes had begun to find his. "I'll walk it," he said. The news spread through camp like a sudden wind. Some waited to see him fail. Others wanted to see if he'd try. That night, the fire was stoked until the wood broke down into glowing red embers. The air smelled of smoke and sage. Silas stood barefoot at the edge of the path. The ground behind him was cool. Ahead, the heat shimmered like a mirage. Drums began slow, steady, a heartbeat that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Ayoka stood near the crowd's edge, arms folded, eyes never leaving his. The first step stole his breath. The second made his knees threaten to fold. Pain rushed from his soles to his spine like fire chasing its own tail. He kept his eyes forward. He did not hurry. One step, then another. Midway, the burn turned alive, clawing under his skin. Sweat blurred his sight. For a heartbeat, he thought of stopping. That's when he felt her, barefoot, silent. Ayoka had stepped onto the coals. She didn't take his arm. She took his hand. They walked the last stretch together. Not fast, not slow, just steady. When they stepped into cool earth again, the drums fell silent. The night itself seemed to be listening. No one spat at his feet after that. Later, he sat alone beside his small fire, his feet in the cool grass. The pain was sharp in places, throbbing in others. But it was clean pain, the kind a man can live with. Across camp, a larger fire burned. Children's voices rose in song. The scent of roasting meat drifted on the wind. She was there, beside her father, She caught his gaze and didn't look away. The suffering wasn't gone. He still felt the weight of being different. But the trial had burned away the worst of the doubt, and somewhere deep inside, the part of him that had been running for years began to slow. Part 2. The days in camp grew heavier, not with storm clouds or biting wind, but with the kind of weight that settles in people's eyes. A man can feel when he's being measured, and when those doing the measuring are hoping to find him wanting. Silas felt it, in the way conversations dimmed as he passed the cooking fires, in the way laughter stilled when he drew near. Even the children, so quick to grin when he showed them how to twist a rope knot, would glance toward their mothers first, as if seeking permission before they dared smile back. He understood. He was a white man on Apache ground, and too many bad stories had already been written about men like him. Knowing why didn't make the days any shorter. One afternoon, he helped a boy mend the rawhide tie on a pony's bridle. The boy was eager, quick to learn, until his uncle appeared. The man's gaze found Silas and hardened without a word. He took the reins, turned the boy toward camp, and walked away. That night, someone spat close enough to his boots for the leather to shine wet in the firelight. A woman passing with a clay pot muttered something sharp in her own tongue. He didn't need a translation. He let it pass. Not because he was patient, not because he was saintly, but because he knew how quickly a single wrong step could close every door for good. The one soul who showed him no suspicion was the dog. Its wound had healed beneath the strip of cloth he'd torn from his own shirt, and it had taken to sleeping near his fire. Sometimes he would wake to find its head resting close to his boots, eyes half open, keeping watch over the night. Ayoka noticed. She said nothing, but the look she gave her dog when she saw it, there was quieter than words, yet full as thanks. One evening, she came to him at sundown. The hills behind her brushed in the last red of the day. She carried 2 strips of smoked venison. Without a word, she offered him one, tore into the other, and sat across the fire. "I used to have a brother," she said at last, her voice low, as if the air might overhear and take offense. "He drowned in that river when we were small. My father has never forgiven the water or himself." Silas listened without moving. "He tries to protect me now," she went on. "Too much. Offers my hand to men he thinks will keep me safe. But I don't want protection." Her eyes were steady on his. "I want someone who sees me." "I hear you," he said simply. No promises, no grand words. The day trouble came. The sky turned the color of old bruises. A scout returned with word that a neighboring tribe had taken offense at Silas's presence. White blood, they said, had no place sleeping on Apache ground, not even if it had pulled the chief's daughter from a river's grip. That evening, Chief Takakota faced him. "You have brought unease to my people," he said. "You have done no wrong, but your being here makes some see danger." Silas nodded. "I can leave." The chief's eyes narrowed, weighing him. Leaving would please them. It would not honor you. There is another way. The other way was fire, a trial older than the white man's maps, the path of coals, a long bed of burning embers, flanked by the watching eyes of the tribe. Not punishment, but proof. A man who walked that line without flinching showed his spirit could carry pain without breaking. "If you walk it," Takakota said, "you will be seen not as an outsider, but as one willing to bleed for belonging." Silas looked at the glowing coals, the air above them rippling with heat. He thought of the river that had nearly claimed him, of the places he had left behind, of the quiet way Ayoka's eyes had begun to find his. "I'll walk it," he said. The news spread through camp like a sudden wind. Some waited to see him fail. Others wanted to see if he'd try. That night, the fire was stoked until the wood broke down into glowing red embers. The air smelled of smoke and sage. Silas stood barefoot at the edge of the path. The ground behind him was cool. Ahead, the heat shimmered like a mirage. Drums began slow, steady, a heartbeat that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Ayoka stood near the crowd's edge, arms folded, eyes never leaving his. The first step stole his breath. The second made his knees threaten to fold. Pain rushed from his soles to his spine like fire chasing its own tail. He kept his eyes forward. He did not hurry. One step, then another. Midway, the burn turned alive, clawing under his skin. Sweat blurred his sight. For a heartbeat, he thought of stopping. That's when he felt her, barefoot, silent. Ayoka had stepped onto the coals. She didn't take his arm. She took his hand. They walked the last stretch together, not fast, not slow, just steady. When they stepped into cool earth again, the drums fell silent. The night itself seemed to be listening. No one spat at his feet after that. Later, he sat alone beside his small fire, his feet in the cool grass. The pain was sharp in places, throbbing in others. But it was clean pain, the kind a man can live with. Across camp, a larger fire burned. Children's voices rose in song. The scent of roasting meat drifted on the wind. She was there, beside her father. She caught his gaze and didn't look away. The suffering wasn't gone. He still felt the weight of being different. But the trial had burned away the worst of the doubt, and somewhere deep inside, the part of him that had been running for years began to slow. Part 3. The morning after the Firewalk, Silas woke to a camp already alive. Women ground corn in wooden mortars, their steady rhythm carrying on the cool air. Men saddled horses, checking girths with practiced hands. Children darted between cook fires, their laughter rising like bright birdsong. Something had shifted. No one spat near his boots. No one stepped aside as if his shadow carried some quiet curse. A boy dashed past and shouted a teasing word in Apache, the sort of harmless jab a man only earned once he was counted as kin. Silas wasn't fool enough to think every heart had turned in a single night. But the air was lighter now, the stairs shorter. The coals had taken their toll, left him with blistered feet, and a layer of skin peeled away. But they had given him something back in return. He saw Ayoka at the corral, braiding the mane of a restless pony. Loose hair spilled down her back. Catching the morning light, she turned, saw him, and did not look away. "You walk well on fire," she said, as if remarking on the weather. "And you walk steady beside a man likely to fall over," he answered, a flicker at the corner of her mouth, almost a smile. That afternoon, Takakota called him to the great council fire. The chief sat cross-legged, his long braid over one shoulder, eyes deep and still as a mountain lake hiding unseen currents. Elders ringed the circle, their silence heavy with the smell of burning sage. "You have walked our fire," Takakota said. "You bled for your place among us." "I wasn't seeking a place," Silas replied, "but I'm honored to be given one." The old man's gaze shifted toward Ayoka, standing just beyond the circle's edge. "My daughter chooses for herself," he said. "I will not give her away, but I will not stand in her way." The words fell sharp and final, like a dry branch breaking over flame, and that night, the celebration fire burned higher than any before. Drums beat low and slow, the earth answering in its own deep pulse. Women passed baskets of roasted meat, flatbread, still warm from the stone. Children spun and leapt at the edge of the firelight, their laughter riding the drum's steady heart. Silas sat just outside the main circle, a tin cup of coffee warming his hands. He wasn't sure if he belonged in the dance or in the shadows. Then Ayoka crossed to him. No hesitation, no searching glance for permission. She stood before him, her shadow stretching over his boots. "You have no name among us," she said, her voice carrying over the drums, "but you have earned one." Her gaze swept the gathered faces. Koa brave one, not by blood, but by choice. She looked back to him. "I will take your name, if you still offer it." For a moment, the fire crackled and the drums went on. Silas's throat felt tight, not with doubt, but with the weight of being truly seen. He didn't answer with words. He took her hand. She didn't let go. Not a lover's clasp, not yet, but the grip of two who had walked through fire together and come out carrying something the world could never take from them. The days that followed moved differently. Silas found himself drawn deeper into the life of the camp. He repaired a wagon bed for an elder whose hands had stiffened with years, rode with a hunting party, and dropped a deer clean with one shot, shared meals with men who would have turned away. Ayoka moved through it all, like the river strong, constant, unhurried. She never clung to him, never hovered. But when their eyes met across the camp, it was as if they'd spoken a sentence only the two of them understood. One evening, they sat together on the riverbank. The water ran low now, a quiet echo of the day it had nearly claimed her. She tossed pebbles into the current, watching the ripples fade. "My brother's name was Kai," she said. "He was younger than me, always racing ahead. That day, he dared the river. I followed, but not fast enough." Silas listened, the river whispering between them. "I once thought I should marry a man who could keep me from the river," she said. "Now I think it should be someone who would walk into it with me." "I can do that," he said. She gave a single nod, sealing a quiet promise they would never speak aloud. But peace in the West was never a thing to be taken for granted. The neighboring tribe that had bristled at Silas's presence had not forgotten him. Word came of a dispute over hunting grounds. Old grudges stirred awake. Takakota gathered the council. Silas sat in the shadows, listening. The chief's voice was calm but edged with steel. He would defend his people. He would defend his choice to let the white cowboy stay. Silas understood then. His being here was no longer just about him and Ayoka. It was a measure of the chief's strength, a test of whether the tribe could open its circle without losing its shape. That night, Ayoka came to his fire. "You could leave," she said. "There'd be no shame in it. You've proved yourself." He shook his head. "And leave you to fight my fight alone." She didn't argue. She just sat beside him, knees drawn up, watching the flames. "You listen like a tree," she said softly. "And I think maybe you belong here." The next morning, as the camp stirred to life, Silas saw them, Takakota and Ayoka, standing together, both watching him with the same steady gaze, not weighing him, not testing him, just seeing him. And he knew then the Firewalk hadn't only changed how they saw him. It had changed how he saw himself. Part 4. The weeks after the Firewalk and the naming felt almost strange in their ease. Silas had lived so long under the weight of wary eyes always being measured, weighed for the wrongness in him, that the sudden absence of it felt like walking without a pack for the first time. You don't realize how heavy something's been until you set it down. The tribe no longer kept him at the edge of their circle. Men nodded as he passed. Women offered bread without turning away. Children ran to him with sticks in their hands, eager to learn the knots he'd once taught in whispers. He wasn't one of them. Not yet. But the space between had narrowed. Through it all, Ayoka moved with the same unshaken stride she'd always had. She never wore her choice of him like a banner. She didn't need to. Her quiet presence beside him at the well, in the daylight, by the fire, said more than ceremony ever could. One evening, as they walked past the corral, the dog that had once been their first bond trotted between them. Its wound had healed, Its coat gleamed in the firelight. It brushed against Silas's leg, then hers, as if to claim them both. Ayoka bent to scratch its ears. "You see," she murmured. "It knows." They began to talk about building, not all at once. A word here, an idea there, until the thought took root. A home near the river, close enough for water, far enough from the floodline. A place neither wholly inside nor wholly outside the camp. Like the two of them, they worked without fanfare. Silas split logs and set them straight. Ayoka wove mats for the floor and hung them to dry in the sun. She planted sage, wild mint, and sweetgrass by the doorway. The wind carried their scent, mingling with the fresh-cut wood. It wasn't without challenge. Some nights, coyotes yipped too close to the walls. Other nights, the low thump of distant drums drifted in from the tribe that still saw him as a trespasser. But Ayoka never wavered. She had chosen her place and would not be moved. One evening, they stood together, watching the river under a bruised purple sky. The water was low now, quiet as a sleeping child. "I don't fear it anymore," she said. Silas turned. "Why's that?" Her eyes stayed on the current. "Because the river doesn't get to choose my ending. I do." He thought of the day he'd pulled her from its grip, and of every step since. "You saved me first," he said softly. This time, when she looked at him, the weight of all they had walked through together was in her eyes and nowhere else. The tribe began weaving their names together in small ways. A blanket sold at the trading circle, paid for with venison Silas had hunted, a spear repaired with rawhide Ayoka had cut. Even Takakota began to call him Koa without the measured pause of formality. Late one afternoon, the chief came to the cabin. He stood in the doorway, taking in the herbs by the sill, the carved beams, the fire crackling in the hearth. "You have built more than walls here," Takakota said. "You have built a root." Silas didn't answer. Some things didn't need words, but peace in the West never comes without a test. The neighboring tribe, the same one that had once wanted him gone, sent word. They would meet to speak about the hunting grounds. Some feared trouble. Others feared they would demand Silas leave. The meeting gathered at the council fire. Men stood in a tight circle, the air thick with pipe smoke and the weight of unspoken history. The visitor's leader fixed his gaze on Silas. "You have no blood here." Silas stood steady. "Blood's not the only way a man belongs." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Takakota's voice cut through it. "He has walked our fire. He has bled for our circle, and my daughter has chosen him. That is enough." The leader's eyes shifted to Ayoka. She met his stare without so much as a blink. After a long pause, the man looked away. The meeting ended without further word. That night, sitting by their own fire, Ayoka reached for his hand. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would. You stayed even when it would have been easier to leave." He watched the flames dance across her face. Love's not worth much if it only lasts until the trail gets rough. When the first snow came, dusting the cabin roof and the sage outside, their home stood solid. The river ran low and clear. On the doorframe, Silas carved her name. Ayoka traced the letters with her fingers, each one like a promise. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the quiet between them, with the smell of wood smoke curling into the winter air, they both knew the fire they had walked was behind them, but the life they had built from its heat was only beginning. Part 5. Winter, along the river, had its own voice. It didn't howl like the mountain passes or sing like the open prairie. It whispered low, steady, unbroken through the willows and cottonwoods, carrying the murmur of water that never quite froze. Silas came to know it as the sound of home. By then, The cabin they'd built stood sure against the wind, as if it had grown from the earth itself. Smoke curled from the chimney most mornings. The herbs in their boxes, brushed with frost, still held green. Abel, thick-coated and content, stood tethered in the lee of the wall. Inside, Ahayoka moved to the quiet rhythm of the season, grinding corn at the low table. Her hair braided over one shoulder, humming now and then, a tune so soft it barely reached him where he sat by the fire. Carving wood, there was no single moment when Silas realized this was the life he'd been searching for. It came in pieces, the smell of coffee she had brewed before dawn, the thump of the dog's tail at the doorway when either of them stirred, the sight of her herbs swaying in the winter wind, rooted to this place as surely as the stones and the trees. One evening, as dusk poured violet light through their one small window, she set her grinding stone aside and crossed to him. Without a word, she took his hand and led him outside. The cold was sharp enough to sting his lungs. Above them, the stars spilled bright and endless across the sky. The river moved in slow silver ribbons, its banks dusted white. "I used to think the water was cursed," she said quietly. "It took my brother, and I thought it would take me. It almost did," he murmured. She looked up at him, her breath curling into the air between them. "Not anymore. Now I think it gave me you." Silas was not a man for speeches, but some truths didn't need them. He pulled her close, and they stood there together, listening to the winter voice of the river. Life in the West never lets you hold still for long. Come spring, the thaw brought its labors. They mended fences, cleared fallen branches, patched the cabin roof. Silas rode the hills with a rifle, bringing back venison and the occasional wild turkey. Ayoka traded herbs and woven mats for salt, coffee, and thread. But every evening, no matter how far he'd ridden, he came home before dark. She'd be there hair loose or in a braid, a small fire going. The dog stretched long on the floorboards. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. The quiet between them always felt like something earned. One afternoon, when the river ran fat with meltwater, he found her barefoot at its edge, the hem of her dress brushing wet stones. "Still trust it?" he asked. She turned just enough for him to see her smile. "More than I trust most men." "Should I take that as a compliment?" "You can take it however you like," she said, stepping into the shallows. The current curled around her ankles, tugging. She didn't flinch. She waded in until the water lapped her knees, then bent to let it run through her fingers. Silas stepped in beside her, the chill biting through his boots. "I could have drowned here," she said. "You didn't?" "No, because you were there." They stayed until the cold crept higher, then turned back toward the cabin together. The dog trotted behind, shaking water from its fur. Inside, Silas lit the lamp, while she unwrapped a bundle of dried flowers and set them in the window sage. Wild mint, sweetgrass, the same plants she had planted their first summer here. "You keep planting them," he said. She nodded. "Because the land remembers kindness, and so does the heart." That night, as the fire burned low, Silas carved something new into the inside of the cabin door. Not her name this time, but their initials, side by side. He didn't tell her. By morning, she had found it. She ran her fingers over the grooves, tracing each letter. When she looked at him, her eyes were wet but steady. "Now," she said softly, "this place will never forget us." In the months that followed, word of them traveled. Some told it as the story of a cowboy who walked through fire for an Apache woman. Others told it as the tale of a woman who taught a drifting man how to stand still. Silas didn't care how it was told, so long as the truth stayed with them, the truth that it wasn't fire or river that bound them, but the choice they made each day to stay. And sometimes, in the deep quiet, with the wind threading through the willows and the river whispering against its banks, he'd remember the first time he saw her hair streaming in the water, arms flailing, vanishing under the current, and think how strange it was that a life could begin in the space between drowning and breath. Some stories end with a cheer, a clean line between what came before and what comes after. This one doesn't, because life in the West rarely dealt in endings. It dealt in seasons, in days you stayed and days you left, in the small, wordless acts that spoke louder than any vow. For Silas and Ioka, the river never lost its voice. It still swelled high in spring, still whispered low in winter, still carried the memory of the day. It almost claimed her, but now it was part of their life, not the beginning, not the end, just the constant current running through the middle. They built a life by its banks, one fire, one fence post, one herb bed at a time. Travelers passing along the trail would point toward their cabin and say, "That's where the cowboy lives, the one who walked fire for her." But the truth was quieter than that. He hadn't walked the fire to win her. She hadn't chosen him because of it. They had chosen each other because, in a world that shouted for possession and pride, each had found someone who would stay not out of debt, not out of duty, but out of choice. I imagine them years later, a touch of gray in the hair, the step still steady, the river low in summer, high in spring, their constant neighbor. Maybe they're planting sweetgrass again. Maybe she still hums while she works. Maybe he's still carving wood by the fire, while Abel's offspring graze in the lee of the cabin. No crowds, no grand declarations. Just two people who had once walked through fire together and decided never to walk away. Tell me, what did this story stir in you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you'd like more stories like this one, subscribe and ring that bell so you'll never miss a ride. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment. I understand, Koa, because sometimes the truest courage isn't in the fight. It's in the staying. The carved initials on the inside of the cabin door, worn smooth by her fingertips over the years. The river murmuring outside, smoke curling from the chimney into the wide, endless western sky.